Dates aren't the same as regular sugar. They don't respond the same in the body. Sure, they have sugar. Sure, they are a carbohydrate. And at the end of the day, carbohydrates do operate similarly in our body when they're broken down into pure glucose, fructose, whatever. But there are key differences here. They are not potato. They are very different. And the thing is when you look at the literature, it makes some more sense. Now, it's not just because of the fiber in a date. Okay, dates, yes, they have fiber. They are a whole fruit, so it's different than just consuming pure table sugar. But there's something fundamentally different, and we will break it all down. So first, we need to look at a study that actually analyzes the difference between fruit juice and a sugar solution inside the body, which is wild because most of us think fruit juice is pure sugar, and fruit juice does have a lot of sugar, but when we look at it like this, it really puts it in a different perspective. So let's break it down. And after today's video, I also popped a link down below for ARMRA colostrum, which is what I would say one of the most important supplements when you are fasting. And the reason is because after a fast, your gut barrier integrity is a little bit compromised. And that's what colostrum is really most noted for, is gut health and gut barrier integrity. So I've been using colostrum for a long time, and specifically ARMRA, because they're the only brand that still has the bioactive compounds, over 400 of them, intact, because they use a particular cold processing that doesn't damage the living bioactive compounds that are in colostrum. So really unique product, and that's why it's been making so many waves. It really is the only colostrum product out there that is worth taking, at least in my opinion. So that link down below gets you a special discount off ARMRA. They've got their travel stick packs, they've got their tubs. I prefer the orange flavor because it's, I don't know, it just tastes good. It kind of tastes like an orange creamsicle, and the stick pack's really convenient when I'm traveling and when I know my gut health might be a little bit more compromised, or I'll take it a little bit more often when I'm fasting or a little more stressed. So that link down below in the top line of the description. So this study was published in Nutrients, and it's an interesting one because it is done in rodents, but it's still very, very clear. Okay, so it's a 4-week study where they gave rodents 4 different kinds of fruit juices or a sugar solution that they could consume ad libitum. So it was the same amounts of sugar, same concentration, same content of sugar. Just one was from fruit juice and one was from a sugar solution. With the ad libitum fruit juice, they could consume as much as they wanted to, and they saw no increase in fasting blood glucose. This is pretty wild because you would expect that there would be an increase there. Now, with the sugar solution, there was an increase in fasting glucose, but that's not where it stops. In the sugar solution group, there was an increase in caloric intake that there was not in the fruit juice group, and there was also an increase in oxidative stress. Okay, well, maybe that has something to do with the polyphenols that are in the fruit juice that's protecting from the oxidative stress. I don't know how you really explain the caloric intake change, maybe the difference in fructose versus sucrose. But the interesting thing is that even with sucrose, you're still looking at a decent percentage of fructose, because sucrose is a combination of glucose and fructose. We're not talking pure glucose here. So it's actually more of a similar makeup to fruit than people would typically think. What else is interesting is in the sugar group, there was an increase in weight gain. There was more weight actually accumulated. There was an increase in overall hyperglycemia and an increase in insulin resistance. This is interesting because with the insulin resistance piece, a lot of times it's a which came first, the chicken or the egg situation with fatty liver and insulin resistance. And some would say that, well, fruit juice would give you a fatty liver because of the fructose. But in this case, it was the sugar solution that actually increased insulin resistance, implying that there could be a change in fatty liver. They didn't test this with this study, which would have been interesting to see. Lastly, there was impaired glycation with the sugar group that wasn't with the fruit group, meaning that it was promoting the activation or the advanced glycation in product effect. So more glycation. Now, when we look at dates, we do have to understand that in a whole food date, it's going to be lower glycemic. That's probably because of fiber, but also a number of different things and how it's ripened. For example, a study published in Diabetes and Metabolic Syndrome looked at different dates, and they found that like rhubarb dates are about a 47 on the glycemic index scale. That's actually pretty low. Okay, then you have tamer dates in a sun-dried fashion, which are about a 45 or so on the glycemic index scale. And then you have tamer dates that are more commercially ripened. You're looking at these down to like a 35, 36 on the glycemic index scale. So we have a wide variety, and then there's even some dates, depending on how they're ripened, that can be as high as a 74. So I encourage you to do some research. Maybe you can just Google it or ChatGPT it or something where you find like what date kinds are going to be the lowest GI. Because yeah, it has to do with fiber, antioxidants, but it could also just do with how it's ripened. And even then, it's a negligible difference in the taste in some ways for those that aren't familiar with dates. Probably the most profound piece is that dates contain a very small amount of allulose. Now, allulose is also a little bit in raisins. It's also a little bit in figs. Figs and dates happen to be 2 fruits that I'm a big fan of, particularly figs because they're even lower sugar content than dates. But this is interesting because with allulose, there was a cool study published in BMJ where they took 30 non-diabetic people, okay, so regular people that didn't have any like diabetes or insulin resistance. They gave them 50 grams of sucrose, so 50 grams sucrose bolus, and then they gave them 2.5 grams or 5 grams or 7.5 grams or 10 grams of deallulose. What they found is that in a dose-dependent fashion, allulose brought their blood sugar down, and 30 minutes after consumption actually brought their insulin levels down too, indicating that it was actually helping the clearance of glucose. Now, I've talked about allulose before on this channel, but in this particular case, the reason it's probably having this profound effect with dates is threefold. One, there's an increase in GLP-1 activity. So more GLP-1 having an Ozempic-like effect. Okay, so GLP-1, therefore making it so that you're more satiated, you possibly eat less, but also end up clearing the glucose and putting it where it needs to go better. Second, it inhibits alpha-glucosidase, which means it literally slows down the breakdown of the carbohydrates a little bit more. And thirdly, it binds to the GLUT2 receptor. Now, the GLUT2 receptor is interesting because it takes glucose predominantly and puts it in the liver. Now, GLUT2 receptors have a very low affinity for sugar, but a high capacity. And what that means is that they, in the presence of high blood sugar, they can soak up a lot of the overage. So they're very good at taking that extra and putting it somewhere else. So they help it get into the liver. So if they take and they occupy that GLUT2 receptor with allulose, you're reducing the amount of sugar that's going into the liver, which thereby means you could help prevent more in the way of insulin resistance, but you could also help clear that glucose so it doesn't contribute to extra sugar in the liver. So then it's actually able to be utilized by other cells and possibly just reducing it at all and thereby allowing other glucose transporters to put it into the muscle cells. One of the most interesting things about dates is if you eat a whole date and you also get the date seeds, there's interesting evidence on the antioxidant profile of the date seeds themselves, or the date seed extract. And with this, we look at a study published in Scientific Reports. It was mechanistic, but it looked at the impact of date seeds on the pancreas. So this study found that date seeds decrease the oxidative stress and decrease the inflammation in the pancreas, and thereby allowed the pancreatic islet cells to produce more insulin. This is tremendous because, again, from an insulin resistance standpoint, it's allowing the pancreas to produce more insulin, which allows the body to deal with glucose better, which subsequently long-term requires less insulin to be produced because you retain or regain that sensitivity and you don't have this vicious cycle happening anymore. There's also a few other really interesting things about dates. For one, they're very high in beta-glucans. Beta-glucans are a type of sugarish, they're technically a sugar, I guess, prebiotic fiber, however you want to classify them. There's like multiple glucose molecules that are bound together, but we cannot activate them or access them because we don't have the enzyme to unlock all those glucose molecules bound together. So essentially, it forms a gel. So you think like oatmeal, high in beta-glucans, that's why it gets gelatinous and weird. So when you eat dates, it forms a gelatinous-like substance in your gut that actually makes it harder to absorb the sugar. Then you also have galactomannan, which is another interesting compound that forms a gel-like substance. So dates, when they're in our gut, we probably don't absorb all the sugar. That's probably what's quite interesting about it, why they don't have the same blood sugar impact. Now, they're still sugar, so please keep in mind, I don't think you should just go out willy-nilly eating all of them, but also the saponins that are in dates have a profound effect on oxidative stress and inflammation. So at the end of the day, I hope you're sticking with me through this whole video. Know that dates are still sugar. And if you have insulin resistance or you're dealing with blood sugar issues, I don't suggest you go and eat a handful of them. But if you're trying to sweeten something and you really want sugar, perhaps using date sugar or even whole mashed dates is just a better option for you. As always, please keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.